right, let's dive straight into this explainer, demystifying the Bermuda Triangle, science, data, and the death of a legend. We all know the stories, right? The ghost ships, the vanishing planes, the wild supernatural forces. But today, we're completely stripping away the folklore to look straight at the hard facts. We're going to demystify the Bermuda Triangle using real science, actual data, and a really critical look at how legends are actually born. But look, instead of getting bogged down in all that foggy myth and legend, we're going to use actual historical records and some really cutting-edge oceanography to find out what is actually lurking in these waters. Let's dive right in. 500,000. That's a massive 500,000 square miles of the Atlantic Ocean. We're talking about a zone stretching between the southeast coast of Florida, Bermuda up north, and Puerto Rico down south. And it's not some isolated spooky wasteland. It's actually one of the most heavily traveled shipping lanes in the entire world, just absolutely bustling with daily commercial and military traffic. Yet, somehow, this specific patch of water has earned chilling nicknames like the Devil's Triangle or the Limbo of the Lost. So how did that happen? Well, let's look at the actual history that put this stretch of water on the map in the first place.
Moving on to the Great Vanishing Acts, when history became mystery.
You see, the modern myth wasn't born from old pirate tales. It started with documented modern military history. Back in March 1918, during the First World War, the USS Cyclops, this absolutely massive US Navy cargo ship, was sailing from Brazil to Baltimore. It entered this region, the radio just went dead, and nothing. A 90-day search turned up absolutely zero trace of it. But the panic really hit the stratosphere in December 1945 with Flight 19. 5 Navy torpedo bombers took off from Florida in perfectly clear weather. Suddenly, the flight leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, radios in sounding frantic. His compasses are spinning wildly. He literally can't tell the ocean from the sky, and then all 5 planes just vanish from radar. And if that wasn't terrifying enough, a massive rescue plane with 13 people on board was sent to find them that same night. It vanished too. Searchers scoured 300,000 square miles and found no wreckage, no oil slicks, nothing. Investigators literally stated it was as if they'd flown to Mars. And we really have to pause and grasp the scale here. 306. That is the number of souls who vanished on the USS Cyclops alone, along with over 10,000 tons of cargo. We're not talking about tiny wooden dinghies getting caught in a sudden storm. These are massive, heavily equipped military vessels and advanced aircraft evaporating without a single trace. It was these very real, incredibly tragic human losses that laid the groundwork for genuine public panic. Which brings us to creating the modern legend, selling the supernatural. So how did real maritime tragedies turn into a manufactured ghost story? Well, money, mostly. In 1964, a writer named Vincent Gaddis coined the exact term, the Deadly Bermuda Triangle, in a Pulp magazine. People were super hungry for sci-fi mysteries and UFO stories back then, and the idea spread like wildfire. A decade later, Charles Berlitz dropped a book literally called The Bermuda Triangle, and it sold millions of copies globally. Suddenly, wild theories about Atlantis and alien abductions were completely mainstream. But eventually, a researcher named Larry Kusche came along and kind of crashed the supernatural party. Kusche actually did the homework. He spent years digging through old logbooks, weather records, original newspaper clippings, the whole shebang. And he proved definitively that writers like Berlitz were heavily exaggerating the conditions just to sell books. They were deliberately leaving out the fact that massive severe storms were raging during these disappearances, making perfectly natural, though tragic accidents seem entirely supernatural. Okay, let's get into the hard facts with Science Explains the Mystery, Natural Phenomena at Work. Once we drop the pulp fiction, the rigorous, logical science actually makes a lot of sense. Take the compass anomalies, for instance. There's a real phenomenon called an agonic line. Normally, if you're navigating, you have to carefully calculate the difference between true geographic north, what's on a map, and magnetic north, which is where your compass actually points. But in certain parts of the Bermuda Triangle, those two norths perfectly align. It completely eliminates normal magnetic variation. If a pilot isn't completely prepared for that, their compass is going to malfunction severely. And that is the absolute aha moment that explains what happened to Lieutenant Charles Taylor on Flight 19. His manual compass spun aimlessly, he lost his bearings, and it led to a tragic crash, not an alien abduction. Okay, but what about the ships that vanish without leaving a single piece of debris behind? Well, deep beneath the seabed in this area, there are massive deposits of methane gas. If an underwater eruption happens,
Kind of like an underwater volcano, it releases billions of tiny bubbles surging toward the surface. As these bubbles mix with the ocean, the water's density absolutely plummets. Almost instantly, the water literally can no longer support the weight of a massive vessel. The ship loses all buoyancy and drops straight down into the ocean, like a rock in an elevator shaft. It happens so violently and so quickly that the crew can't even send a distress signal, and the whole vessel is swallowed whole, which perfectly explains the total absence of floating debris.
And we absolutely can't forget the extreme natural forces native to this area. The Bermuda Triangle is practically famous for violent, unpredictable conditions. We're talking rogue waves that can suddenly tower over 100 feet high. Imagine a solid, moving wall of water, fast and heavy enough to obliterate a modern ship in a fraction of a second, snapping the hull entirely in half. Plus, in 2016, satellites spotted these bizarre hexagonal clouds over the region. Scientists call them air bumps. When they break apart, they blast downward winds reaching 170 miles per hour, slamming into the ocean like a hurricane in a bottle. Think about surviving pilots like Bruce Gernon in 1970. He reported flying into a terrifying fog tunnel, losing all visibility, only to find his plane traveling at an impossible speed of over 300 miles per hour. Getting caught in massive 170-mile-per-hour downdrafts and the unpredictable Gulf Stream currents easily accounts for the unnatural speeds and bizarre turbulence that people have blamed on the paranormal for decades. Now, let's look at the ultimate proof. The hard data speaks, numbers don't lie. This is the absolute mic drop of this entire explainer. 0%. The global marine insurance industry is built entirely on calculating risk down to the tiniest possible margin, right? If a specific area of the ocean is genuinely cursed, or even just statistically more dangerous because of extreme weather, your insurance premium is going up, period. Yet, data from major marine insurance companies, including the legendary Lloyd's of London, shows a 0% increased risk for vessels passing through the Bermuda Triangle. They do not charge a single extra penny in premiums to cross this supposedly deadly zone. Why? Because mathematically, the extra risk simply isn't there. And official agencies back this up 100%. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration bluntly states that the number of accidents in the Bermuda Triangle is no higher than on any other busy sea route in the world. In fact, organizations like NOAA and the U.S. Coast Guard don't even recognize the area as a hazardous or mysterious geographic zone. If you look at an official map, it doesn't even have fixed boundaries. It's just a heavily trafficked region of the ocean. And sure, the sea is wildly unpredictable and dangerous, but proportionally, the danger here is mathematically identical to anywhere else on the globe. Alright, so to really get the myth, we first have to understand the spooky lore that built it up. Back in 1881, there was this ship called the Ellen Austin, and it set off from Liverpool heading over to New York. The journey was completely normal, right up until the ship reached the Sargasso Sea region of the Atlantic. Then, as the legend goes, the sea suddenly turns eerily calm. The wind just dies away, and within moments, a thick fog closes in on all sides. It's exactly this kind of chilling storytelling that hooked everyone, and basically established the ominous reputation of the area we now call the Bermuda Triangle. From those creepy early accounts, boom, a full-blown cultural phenomenon was born. For literally decades, the public imagination has been totally obsessed with the idea that ships, planes, and people just mysteriously vanish in the western North Atlantic. People came up with all sorts of wild theories, everything from aliens capturing humans for study to the lost continent of Atlantis pulling ships down to crazy interdimensional vortices. It just snowballed into this completely manufactured mystery of supernatural proportions. Section 1. Enter the skeptic, Larry Kusche. So in 1975, this former pilot and research librarian named Larry Kusche decides he's going to actually go back and look at the original source documents. We're talking weather records, Coast Guard reports, old newspaper archives, the whole shebang. And what he found completely dismantled the myth. Take this super famous case of Flight 19. That's the group of 5 Navy bombers that disappeared back in 1945. The whole enduring myth insists they vanished under clear skies because of some strange phenomena. But Kusche found the actual tragically mundane reality. The flight was led by a pilot who frankly had a well-documented history of getting lost. On top of that, the weather deteriorated rapidly while they were up there, and their crucial navigational equipment just straight up failed. And Kusche's research revealed this mind-blowing pattern. So many of the vessels that the myth claimed just disappeared without a trace were actually found, but, they weren't swallowed by some invisible force or a portal to another dimension.
They were found heavily damaged by severe natural storms. Ultimately, he proved that the whole legend was just based on faulty logic, really inaccurate reporting, and just the sheer repetition of errors over time. Okay, moving on to Section 2, the case of the USS Cyclops. Let's look at a specific case. The deck was completely stacked against the USS Cyclops before she even saw a single bad cloud. In early 1918, this massive Navy collier leaves Brazil for Baltimore, and the conditions here were a disaster waiting to happen. She was overloaded with 10,800 long tons of heavy manganese ore. To put that in perspective, her normal maximum capacity was only 8,000 tons. Oh, and her starboard engine, completely inoperative because of a cracked cylinder. Plus, she was commanded by Captain George W. Worley, a super erratic guy who supposedly chased an ensign around the ship with a pistol and bizarrely liked to walk the decks in long underwear and a derby hat. Finally, if you look at historical weather maps, a violent storm swept right through the Virginia Capes area at the exact time the highly vulnerable Cyclops would have been passing through. The result of all this? Absolutely catastrophic. 306. That is the number of crew and passengers who were lost at sea when the Cyclops vanished. To this day, it is still the U.S. Navy's second largest non-combat loss of life. Just a horrific tragedy. And here's the kicker. The tragedy of the Cyclops was not some isolated supernatural event. It was a devastating structural one. Decades later, during World War II, two of her sister ships, the Proteus and the Nereus, also vanished at sea. And what did they all have in common? They were all transporting heavy metallic ore. Experts have pointed out that heavy ore like manganese, when it gets wet, can turn into this shifting slurry. Imagine thousands of tons of wet mud suddenly sliding all at once to one side of the ship's hold. That kind of unbalanced strain on the structural I-beams, it literally tears the ship apart from the inside out. Which brings us to Section 3, the real ocean mystery, science and rogue waves. When we step back and look at the hard environmental facts from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the danger of this specific region just makes total sense. First off, a huge chunk of Atlantic tropical storms and hurricanes pass right through this area. On top of that, you've got the super powerful Gulf Stream running straight through it, which creates these rapid, violent weather changes that can easily catch a ship totally off guard. The Caribbean Sea is also notoriously packed with shallow, really treacherous spots that are incredibly tough to navigate. And, fun fact, there's evidence that this is a region where a compass will sometimes point to true north rather than magnetic north. You can imagine how easily that could confuse an unprepared navigator. But there's another environmental factor out there, something that used to be completely dismissed as just sailor folklore until science actually proved it was real: the rogue wave. A rogue wave is technically defined as an extreme statistical event where the wave's height is more than double the significant wave height, which is really just a fancy way of saying double the average height of the surrounding waves. These are not just big swells slowly building up over time. They are sudden, monstrous walls of water that seem to just materialize out of absolute nowhere. To give you a really visceral sense of what we're talking about here, check this out. Researchers using wave buoys off the U.S. West Coast actually recorded a massive rogue wave measuring almost 19 meters high. That's over 62 feet of sheer water just rising up out of nowhere back in 2008. Imagine a weakened ship, maybe one with a cracked engine and an overloaded cargo hold, unexpectedly slamming into a vertical wall of water that massive. It's terrifying. And when you look at the actual buoy displacement data captured during a rogue wave event, you see this insanely aggressive horizontal and vertical displacement. It essentially maps out a completely circular wave motion. This isn't just a gentle swell lifting a boat up and down. It is a violent, churning rotation of raw energy. If a ship's bow and stern get caught on the peaks of successive waves, this violent circular force hits the unsupported middle of the hull and literally snaps the stressed ship right in half. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but these rogue waves have to be incredibly rare, right? Like once-in-a-lifetime anomalies. Nope, not at all. A really comprehensive study looking at buoy data over a combined 81 years of observation time proved that rogue waves are shockingly common. In sheltered coastal waters, buoys recorded an average of 63 rogue waves every single year. Out in the unprotected open ocean, that number jumps up to 101 per year. These mathematically proven giants are absolutely a common threat, just lurking in the background of global shipping. And honestly, this data right here basically bursts the entire Bermuda Triangle myth.
When we extrapolate the global likelihood of encountering a rogue wave in the open ocean in a 24-hour period, you can see that the high-risk areas are concentrated all over the world. The most dangerous zones, they're in the Southern Ocean, the North Pacific, and the North Atlantic, right along our major shipping routes. The risk of extreme weather and monstrous waves is a global phenomenon. It completely shatters the idea that this kind of danger is somehow magically localized to one specific triangle off the coast of Florida.
So, compiling all of this evidence, it's really worth reading the official stance of both the US Navy and the Coast Guard. They contend that there are absolutely zero supernatural explanations for these disasters at sea. From their vast on-the-water experience, they say, the combined forces of nature and human fallibility outdo even the most incredulous science fiction. A cracked engine, an erratic captain, violently shifting cargo, and an 18-meter wall of water, that is entirely sufficient to explain these devastating maritime tragedies. Which kind of leaves us with this super fascinating reflection on human nature itself, doesn't it? As the Bermudian magazine noted when they were looking back at Larry Kusche's extensive work, mystery sells. We humans absolutely crave these tantalizing tales to obscure the sometimes mundane, but honestly often terrifying truths of our physical world. We manufactured this crazy story of aliens in Atlantis because, frankly, it was almost easier to digest than facing the sheer, indifferent, and destructive power of the sea. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. If the ocean is mathematically and physically capable of suddenly producing unpredictable, violent 19-meter-high walls of water, do we really need a supernatural explanation to fear it? The real world, as it turns out, is formidable enough on its own. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this gives you a profound, maybe even slightly chilling, new respect for the awe-inspiring physics of our natural world. So this leaves us with a really fascinating question. If the hard data proves there's no heightened danger, if science completely explains the compass malfunctions and the sudden sinkings, and if we literally know the media manufactured the hype just to sell books, why do we so desperately prefer a legend over the scientific truth? I mean, it says far more about human psychology, doesn't it? Our profound hunger for the sensational and our deep-seated fascination with the unknown. The Bermuda Triangle isn't a magical or cursed place. It's a mirror reflecting our love for a great mystery. The only real difference between this patch of ocean and any other is that elsewhere, shipwrecks are just tragic news. In the Bermuda Triangle, they become legends. Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the mysteries around you.